In this world, is the destiny of mankind controlled by some transcendental entity or law? Is it like the hand of God hovering above? At least it is true that man has no control, even over his own will.
Previously, we explored how Nathan of Gaza redefined traditional Kabbalistic teachings to support Sabbatai Ṣevi's messianic role. Now we'll see the explosive impact this movement had across the Jewish world, from Turkey to North Africa and beyond. Get ready for tales of mass repentance, wild prophecy, and a religious fervor unlike anything the world has ever seen. Overall, what was said about the movement was such.
And there was a repentance, the like of which has never been since the world was created. In Turkey, it is impossible to describe it. Many people everywhere who fasted the whole week, and those who fasted 2 or 3 consecutive days every week, and women and children fasted at least every Monday and Thursday. They would arise at midnight and recite the midnight devotions, and at dawn would immerse themselves reciting the great confession of sins. Was so crowded that it was almost impossible to enter there. At night, men would lie down naked in the snow and roll in it. Then they would take thorns and nettles and scourge themselves until their bodies were covered with blisters, and every day they would take a scourging with a hard lash. They sold their houses and property for almost nothing, for they firmly believed that they would soon go to Palestine, so as to leave nothing behind. Wealthy youths who married poor orphan girls without dowry. No young man wanted to remain a bachelor, and each one married the first and best woman he could find. No distinction between rich and poor. And nobody was really poor because people wanted nothing but their immediate needs, and those who had nothing received their wants from those who had. Everyone desired to take a scholar into his house in order to study the law with him day and night, and the rich would offer them lodging in their houses and provide for them. They spent their time in the synagogues in deep meditation and repentance. Some caused boiling wax to drip down their naked bodies for an hour or more. Others again wrapped their naked flesh in nettles and put on heavy clothes in order to increase the mortification. No Jew attended to business. The shops were closed, and the artisans plied penance and fasts instead of their trade. What I have written is not even a half of what has been reported, by not one, but by hundreds of trustworthy witnesses. But in Turkey, they did 10 times more. Many pilgrims, men and women, who came to him from Persia and Media and Babylonia and Turkey. From Persia, we have the eyewitness report of the Persian Jews left their houses and lived in the fields, where in sackcloth and ashes they fasted and prayed for the advent.
The movement gained traction in Asia, with reports from Baghdad, Babylonia, and Persia, though details are sparse. Nathan exchanged letters with Baghdad, where some struggled to comprehend the message and lost faith. In the mountains of Kurdistan, with a history of messianic fervor, some followers continued observing fasts. In North Africa, regions like Algiers, Oran, and Morocco largely embraced the messianic news, while Yemen's Jews, influenced by Maimonides and Kabbalah, enthusiastically prepared for the ingathering of exiles in 1668. However, this led to violent persecution, with many fleeing or being killed. Nathan and Sabbatai became powerful messianic symbols, especially in isolated communities like Yemen. The main sources of messianic propaganda were Raphael Joseph's court in Cairo and Nathan of Gaza's circle in Palestine. Many emissaries traveled between them, and early responses to Nathan's tracts were explained in Cairo. Though Samuel, son of Hayyin Vital, was part of Raphael's Kabbalistic circle, There is no clear evidence of his Sabbatian faith. Opponents of the movement in Egypt came from Palestine, although there were fervent supporters among the rabbis. Despite the zealous activity of Sabbatian supporters, there was notable silence from their opponents. The Rabbinic Council of Jerusalem formally notified the rabbis of Constantinople and Smyrna about the excommunication, but these reports did not seem to concern Egypt or other parts of Europe. This silence among the rabbis, particularly those in Egypt, may have been due to suppression by influential figures like Raphael Joseph, but remains uncertain. There was only one prophet active in Egypt, Rabbi Mattathiah Bloch Ashkenazi. With all this, life in Cairo appeared to continue as usual. Information from Palestine between autumn 1665 and winter 1666 is limited, but mystical fervor continued. Nathan produced Kabbalistic tracts and maintained contact with Sabbatai, quickly gaining followers despite rabbinical opposition. The Constantinople rabbinate sought to verify Nathan's prophetic mission, believing it would confirm Sabbatai's messiahship. They sent 4 skeptical Palestinian rabbis to question him, but none responded, leaving the rabbis' silence, especially in Jerusalem, a mystery. It's speculated that the rabbis remained silent to avoid stirring the passionate masses. However, this silence didn't stop the nation from splitting. Rabbi Shalom ben Joseph of Amsterdam reported in December 1665 that Nathan attracted scholars with his exceeding wisdom, though doubts persisted in Egypt. On one of his visits, he
asked him for a sign or a miracle regarding his prophecy, but he refused, saying that he was not permitted to perform one. They should rather wait until they saw the fulfillment of everything. And Rabbi Shalom greatly marveled at his Nathan's courage and his trust in the fulfillment of his prophecies.
Nathan led 300 Jews to the cave of Machpelah for devotions, though not all rabbis supported him. He urged rabbis to reject alms from the diaspora, believing hidden treasures would soon be found in Palestine to support the Jewish community.
It was rumored Nathan had urged the leading rabbi of Palestine, "Let not one more penny from the diaspora come here. There will be sufficient treasures to distribute among all the tribes."
This shift in economic reliance, from trade to anticipated miraculous treasures, began affecting not only Jewish communities, but whole cities and regions who were dependent on trade, which the Jews were heavily involved in. Business came to a standstill.
Inevitably suspended routine economic activities, and the shift of interest was echoed in some of the earliest news reports. A letter from Leghorn to the East India Company reported that the Jews of Alexandria write to their correspondents here to send them no more business. They will have no further thoughts of it, but of higher matters.
Meanwhile, there is little reliable information on the attitude of Turkish authorities.
The Pasha of Gaza had kissed the prophet's hands, and Nathan miraculously saved him from death by a poisoned shirt. The report that the Gentiles, too, had noticed the commotion in Gaza is no doubt correct, though the reasons for their passive tolerance are still obscure. The believers, however, were quick to inform their correspondents that many Turks had come to pay homage to the prophet.
In Smyrna, separated from Nathan's direct influence but still receiving his letters, Sabbatai remained for about 4 months. His presence stirred excitement, especially in a city filled with European Christians. Protestant minister Thomas Conan documented the madness of the Jews in 1667, noting how Sabbatai initially stayed quiet, sharing letters that referred to him as the Messiah, hoping they would circulate. In December 1665, during Hanukkah, Sabbatai openly declared himself the Messiah, leading to reports of miracles. Despite past denouncements, local rabbis, including Rabbi Joseph Escaffa, did not act against him, even after likely receiving excommunication orders from Constantinople and Jerusalem. Following Askafa's death, tensions arose between contenders for chief rabbi, Hayim Benveniste, and Rabbi Aaron Lapapa, though their interactions with Sabbatai remain unclear. As time passed, Sabbatai's erratic behavior resurfaced, with accusations of his strange ways returning. His time in Smyrna seemed to alternate between melancholy and moments of normalcy.
Once the Spirit was upon him, he acted under the sole impulsion of his soul and with utter disregard to what others thought about him. After the fit of depression, Sabbatai would remain for a while in a state of normalcy, not raving but arguing quietly, not because he was still busy planning his strategy, but simply because he was not in a psychological state to act. He was essentially a passive personality, and it required the illumination of his manic mood to goad him into action. So far, there had been nothing odd about Sabbatai's behavior, and his ascetic piety would certainly win him popular sympathy. He gave alms to the poor, and everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was discontented gathered themselves unto him. His behavior was that of a pious rabbi who led the prayers of the community.
But suddenly, during the first days of Hanukkah,
Sabbatai appeared in the synagogue in royal apparel, began to intone melodiously the morning psalms, entering on another period of manic euphoria and, as usual, startle everyone with his impressively paradoxical behavior.
in Smyrna, Sabbatai's actions, like visiting the Qadi unharmed and replacing traditional fasts with celebrations, added to his growing mystique. Rumors spread that his wife, Sarah, known for her questionable past, influenced some of his choices, though Sabbatai claimed he had never touched her, as with his previous wives. The city buzzed with stories of miracles, visions of Elijah, and pillars of fire, though none offered concrete details. Trade halted as crowds gathered to witness Sabbatai, who granted royal titles to his followers and divided the world among them, deepening the fervor.
The people of Smyrna saw miracles and heard prophecies. Elijah had appeared in the old synagogue there, and Elijah walked the streets of Smyrna. Dozens, even hundreds, had seen him. He was the anonymous beggar asking for alms, as well as the invisible guest at every banquet. Sabbatai encouraged these fancies. In Amsterdam alone, more than 30 letters were received, announcing this particular appearance of Elijah. The prophets spewed forth ancient words and phrases that had become clichés, though here and there an individual expression of noble spirituality could be heard. 2 emissaries from Jerusalem and Aleppo, Moses Galanti and Daniel Pinto, prophesied in Smyrna. One of the first prophetesses was Sarah, Sabbatai's wife. This was one of the few instances of her active participation in the movement. Conan heard from Dutch merchants who had witnessed the spirit that descended on the first prophetess also moved the daughters of the arch-infidel Hayim Pina, and that Pina was so much impressed by this miracle happening in his own house that he converted to the faith. He found his daughters seized by a trembling and dizziness and foaming at the mouth in the usual prophetic manner. The Hakam Sabbatai Ṣevi sitteth on an exalted throne in heaven, with a crown on his head. Conan himself points out the analogy with similar phenomena among the first English Quakers.
By the beginning of Hanukkah, the miracles that Nathan deemed unnecessary were demanded by popular religious psychology.
Reports, early as December 1665, had confirmed his mission by miracles. He had predicted the sudden death of certain people, a day of darkness, and the fall of great hailstones. Sabbatai also commanded a fire to be made in a public place, in the presence of many beholders, as well as of Christians, as of Turks and Jews, and entered into the fire twice or thrice, without any hurt to his garments or to an hair of his head.
Eventually, whether by Turkish authorities or his own decision, Sabbatai left Smyrna for Constantinople, his illumination having lasted less than 2 weeks, without relapsing into normalcy or melancholy. Before Sabbatai's arrival, in Constantinople, tensions ran high, with letters detailing his excommunication from Jerusalem and accusations of heresy. Nathan's letters, promoting penitence, sparked widespread asceticism, deeply dividing the community, with some scholars accepting his message. In Constantinople, rabbis feared the growing enthusiasm would attract attention from the vizier, which may explain their hesitation to send letters that could further inflame the movement. As Sabbatai's arrival loomed, both believers and skeptical rabbis grew anxious, worried the authorities might hold them responsible for any unrest. The Catholic clergy even noted the intense fervor gripping the city.
Transports of joy, such as one can never understand unless one has seen it.
A young rabbi, Moses Suriel, became a key figure, delivering mystical sermons that introduced a new style of prophetic preaching, further intensifying the Messianic fervor.
He composed a new Zohar in those days. He could tell anyone the good deeds which he had performed that day, the sins of which he had repented, and those of which he had not, and he gave to everyone penances for their sins, and this is truly wonderful. Every night, notables and rabbis would gather to him and hear from his mouth the mighty deeds of the Lord. They would sit with him and sing hymns of praise to Sabbatai Ṣevi.
Upon Sabbatai's arrival in Constantinople, he was immediately arrested, likely due to unrest stirred by his messianic claims and actions by skeptical rabbis. The great vizier Ahmed Koprulu, known for his moderation, ordered the arrest, possibly influenced by the disruption to trade caused by the movement, as the Jewish community held significant control over commerce in the city.
The penitential awakening had reached the point where it caused many of the poor to sell their few belongings and neglect their families in order to follow their false prophet. The disruption of normal life and the cessation of business activities in the Jewish community, which controlled so much of Turkey's commerce. The conspicuous preparations of many believers for their voyage to the Holy Land provoked hostility and suspicion on the part of the government. Travelers all noted the fact that trade, and foreign trade in particular, was almost exclusively in the hands of the Jews, who also monopolized the contacts with the European traders in the country. A Messianic movement would have immediate repercussions on the non-Jewish environment.
During his initial imprisonment, Sabbatai embraced an ascetic lifestyle, preaching repentance and maintaining his image as a devout rabbi, which temporarily eased tensions within the Jewish community. Viewing his imprisonment as part of his destiny to endure suffering in the realm of impurity, Kelapoth, Sabbatai remained calm. Despite opposition from Jewish authorities, Nathan's devotional writings circulated in Constantinople, and followers were drawn to Sabbatai, reigniting ancient practices inspired by visions of the prophet Elijah.
Jews of Turkey, while growing beards, used to shave their heads, but now the custom of the Polish Jews of letting side locks grow at the corners of your head was reintroduced as a Sabbatian innovation. It was noised that the people of the Jews shall take vengeance of those who thus lack the distinguishing marks of the true believer. This renewal of a traditional custom illustrates the absence of antinomian tendencies. The enthusiasm of the believers in Constantinople was not fired by the abolition of ceremonial traditions, but on the contrary, by the renewed and strict observance of hitherto neglected practices.
After over 2 months, the vizier, preoccupied with other matters, decided to transfer Sabbatai to a fortress in Gallipoli on April 19, 1666, just before Passover. Politically motivated, the move aimed to prevent unrest without executing Sabbatai, and bribes facilitated the transfer. This marked a new chapter for Sabbatai, as his imprisonment became symbolic for his followers.
His prison was soon known as Migdal Oz, the Tower of Strength, with reference to Proverbs 18:10. The name of the Lord is a tower of strength. The righteous runneth into it and is safe.
This sparked a bustling pilgrimage business, increasing food prices in Constantinople. Sabbatai's inner circle of rabbis and scholars, called the Holy Brotherhood, supported him, and even French Jesuits visited, curious about the miracles surrounding him. His boldest act was abolishing the 9th of Ab fast, commemorating the temple's destruction, causing division. Some refused to follow, and clashes broke out between believers and skeptics. Ṣevi's wife, the Queen of Palestine, also became active in promoting the movement. French reports described a wave of prophecies, particularly from Moses Suriel, Constantinople's chief prophet, with hundreds of women in the Galata quarter prophesying for months. Some women were bound and beaten to drive out spirits, creating widespread disorder and confusion, with even infants showing signs of possession. By October 1665, news of the Messianic movement reached Europe, but didn't immediately cause a mass reaction. The spread of Sabbatianism occurred largely through letters and rumors, with only 2 documented missionary efforts. Sabbatian writers used esoteric and elusive styles, and news of the movement flowed primarily through Italy, reaching Germany, Holland, England, and beyond. Poland had additional routes via Turkey and the Balkans, while Vienna and Amsterdam became key hubs for information. Close commercial and familial ties, particularly among Marranos expelled from Spain, helped spread the message. Christian sources also influenced and amplified the news, sometimes impressing Jewish followers. Rumors spread about the lost tribes of Israel and their supposed role in Messianic events, and tales of Mecca's conquest by large armies.
Sasportas bitterly complained about the Christian writers who exaggerated the reports and then printed and spread them in order to mislead the Jews, them a laughingstock. Many Christians were not only reading the pamphlets to the Jews, adding to them inventions of their own so as to add sin to iniquity, but actually justified a meritorious deed to trick the Jews in accordance with an eye for an eye.
It was also shaped by local events, like the 1648 massacres in Poland and Russia. Social unrest, poverty, and religious hope intertwined, driving messianic excitement as a response to insecurity and deprivation. Believers, despite Nathan's warnings, saw miracles everywhere. Nathan maintained his belief that no physical miracles were necessary, instead offering mystical teachings, personal guidance, and doctrinal insights. These mystical revelations were seen as divinely inspired, but not miracles in the traditional sense. Small Jewish communities embraced the faith entirely, but in larger, more complex centers, there were opponents. Salonika, one of the world's largest Jewish communities, played a pivotal role in the movement. Rabbi Jacob de Botton confirmed that its rabbis supported the cause and followed orders. According to Conan, the Jews of Salonika exhibited strong messianic faith and extreme acts of penance, with some burying themselves up to their necks or mimicking rabbinical punishments. Shops closed, the wealthy became impoverished, and severe fasting practices even led to death. Despite this, the faith endured in Salonika and other Balkan communities, where many remained devoted to the movement.
He studied in Salonika and, as rabbi of Sarajevo, remembered that at that time there were women who said, "Let us go and slay demons." They dressed themselves in white linen garments and made strange movements in the air with their hands. Then they would spread out their garments and collect much blood coming from the air, as if with their hands they had slaughtered the demons.
The growing excitement even influenced the heart of Christendom, impacting Christians in Rome.
Christians were said to have converted to Judaism. The Inquisition had arrested 4 Frenchmen who had declared that the only true religion was that of Moses. A chief of the church, a cardinal, had told the Jews, "Rejoice, for your Messiah has come." Other sources, too, report excitement in ecclesiastical circles in Rome. In Rome, it was generally concluded that now the Antichrist was to come forth. A rumor to the effect that the Roman Catholic monks in Jerusalem had notified the Pope of Sabbatai's appearance and that the Pope had sent envoys to investigate.
In Siena, newborns were named Sabbatai as early as December 1665. Miracles and prophecies were reported in small communities, and even Christians took notice. In Venice, where the Jewish population included many crypto-Jews, enthusiasm grew. Rabbis there were puzzled by the silence from rabbis in Palestine and Constantinople, sending letters seeking more information, but receiving nothing informative. Nathan's penitential exercises were widely adopted.
In Ferrara, 3 people died as a result of this fast, an uninterrupted fast of 6 days and 6 nights. In 1666, when reports that Sabbatai Ṣevi was generally acknowledged as the Messiah, son of David, 2 people died after fasting 4 days and 4 nights. In other communities, several Jews died after fasting 3 days and 3 nights only.
In Verona, many believers remained steadfast, even after the disintegration of the movement. In Venice, while opposition was quiet, there were disputes about whether Lurianic meditations were still necessary, and tensions arose when rabbis like Sabbatai Bar argued against the movement using Maimonides' teachings, which stated that the Messiah must prove himself with signs.
In spite of their counsels of prudence, the Venetian rabbis were unable to bridge the widening gulf between the 2 parties. The minority of infidels voiced their protests on every occasion, while the believers adopted the liturgical innovations. From abroad, they also insisted on the solemn recitation of the prayer for the King of Israel. Quarrels in the synagogue must have been frequent, particularly on the Sabbath. One unbeliever was beaten up and severely wounded on the Sabbath, and when the believing party to inquire whether or not it was permitted to shed the blood of unbelievers who spoke contemptuously of the Messiah, Sabbatai replied that this was permitted.
The Jewish community of Rome, closer to the Vatican, maintained complete silence, avoiding publishing Nathan's devotional manuals and preferring tolerant reserve. However, a letter from an ardent believer encouraged terrorism against opponents, which led to a dangerous clash between traditional religious authority and the new revolutionary spirit of the movement.
The believers thereupon produced false witnesses who accused the man of the most heinous crimes. The Qadi, who suspected a plot, pretended to sentence the accused to the galleys, ordered his beard to be shaved, and deported him to the house of a high Turkish official in another city where the man remained until the storm had blown over. When he heard that the rabbi reviled and blasphemed the Messiah, he became his enemy and sought his hurt. He delivered the rabbi and some of his supporters into the hands of the ruler, who executed judgment against them and smote them deadly blows and put them in prison. He hurt their feet with fetters and caused much loss of money. Yet for all this, his anger was not turned away. He forced the congregation to remove him from office and not to reinstate him as rabbi within the next 3 years.
Opponents like the Francis brothers in Florence and Leghorn, especially Jacob Francis, a rationalistic scholar, mocked Sabbatai with satirical poems. Jacob, a staunch critic of both the Sabbatian movement and the Zohar, voiced strong opposition until his death in 1667, though his views were not widely supported. Reports from the East spread quickly into Europe, with Amsterdam as one of the key hubs. In Amsterdam, particularly among the Sephardi Jews, enthusiasm for Sabbatai was unrestrained, unlike in Catholic countries where fear of provoking the church tempered reactions. By November 1665, letters from the Orient arrived, with Peter Serrarius passing them to England and other countries, though Christian correspondents often confused names, like Sabbatai became Levi, and eventually referred to the prophet Nathan Levi. The excitement in Amsterdam was overwhelming, with Nathan's penitential handbook and letters rapidly printed and distributed across Europe. The excitement of the Amsterdam rabbis and scholars was so strong that failure never seemed an option to them. Nathan's penitential liturgical handbook further fueled this revival, and letters were quickly printed and distributed across Europe, including multiple editions in Hebrew, Spanish, and Portuguese. Despite practical challenges like the maritime war between England and the Dutch, enthusiasm remained high. An English newspaper in March 1666 even reported that Jews were preparing to leave Amsterdam for the Holy Land.
And there was a great commotion in the city, a very great trembling. They rejoiced exceedingly, with timbrels and with dances, in all the streets. The scrolls of the law were taken out of the ark for ceremonial processional, without considering the possible danger from the jealousy and hatred of the Gentiles. They publicly proclaimed the news and informed the Gentiles of all the reports.
Sabbatian innovations were introduced into synagogue services, sparking controversy between Sasportas and the Amsterdam rabbis. Even Sabbatai's arrest didn't dampen the fervor, with rumors of miracles like resurrection and breaking iron chains circulating. In July 1666, a booklet titled Penitential Exercises According to Isaac Luria was published, along with a Yiddish poem capturing the piety and emotions of the movement, both quickly selling out. Spanish and Portuguese-inspired poems also flourished. By summer 1666, emissaries and letters were sent to Sabbatai from various communities, signed by scholars and rationalists, further showing the widespread reach of the movement beyond Amsterdam.
I have heard and seen great joy in Amsterdam. As good letters arrived, how great was the rejoicing! How the Portuguese Jews took the scrolls of the law out of the Holy Ark and danced and jumped around them.
From Amsterdam, the word of Sabbatai Ṣevi spread quickly, alarming the Inquisition in Spain and Portugal, which feared Marranos might join the movement. Spanish ports were ordered to inspect travelers for suspicious activities, while confused Marranos kept connections with relatives across Iberia. In England, the 1665 plague affected the Jewish community, causing many to flee, including Sasportas. Some Marranos reconverted to Judaism, while England drew parallels with figures like Quaker James Naylor, who had claimed messiahship in 1657. The Jewish community in London, led by R. Benjamin Levi, was likely influenced by Sabbatai's news. In Paris, interest in the movement came mainly from Christian sources, as the Jewish community there was small. The news even reached the New World, particularly the West Indies, where former Marranos stayed in contact with Dutch congregations. Prominent figures like Increase Mather, a Puritan minister and Harvard president, were aware of the movement. Mather's knowledge of the movement helped to educate some of the founding fathers interested in the Kabbalah and Judaism, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson even wrote about their interest in a letter to Adams. We will dive into this rabbit hole in a future video.
To compare the morals of the Old with those of the New Testament would require an attentive study of the former, a search through all its books for its precepts and through all its history for its practices, and the principles they prove as sick commentaries too on these. The philosophy of the Hebrews must be inquired into, their Mishnah, their Gemara, Kabbalah, Jazira, Sohar, Kosri, and their Talmud must be examined and understood in order to do them full justice.
The majority of European Jewry lived in Poland, where the Jewish community shared a deep connection to Kabbalistic and eschatological traditions, particularly after the devastating 1648 massacres. The trauma and material ruin left the Jewish masses vulnerable to the influence of Kabbalah. Sabbatai's declaration that these massacres marked the beginning of the era of redemption resonated with the Polish Jews. They were comforted by Nathan's prophecies, though little was known about Sabbatai's character or actions in Poland. Instead, legend and miracle stories dominated, fueling the Messianic fervor. This fervor soon led to tension with Christians, as Jews began openly proclaiming the advent of redemption and even carried pictures of Sabbatai and Nathan, resulting in attacks by Christian mobs in cities like Pinsk and Vilna. In response, King John Casimir banned the display of Sabbatai's image and ordered the destruction of all printed materials related to him. Despite this, Jewish emissaries traveled to meet Sabbatai, returning as fervent believers, further igniting messianic hopes throughout Poland.
As a result of a new superstition that has arisen among them, the Jews were carrying in public processions in the streets some printed pamphlets that offend against the Christian religion, as well as pictures of their vanities.
Jewish communities in Germany mirrored the enthusiasm seen in Italy and Amsterdam. In early 1666, a Christian witness in Frankfurt reported 400 families preparing to depart for Palestine, with some already gone. The penitential revival touched both rabbis and the masses, and small communities like Westphalia experienced similar excitement. However, economic tensions arose as Jews hurried to settle debts and sell properties, irritating locals. In key Jewish centers like Fürth, Christians published pamphlets criticizing them, with some even claiming that armies of the lost tribes had conquered Mecca. While the liquidation of property slowed after 1666, as Jews adopted a wait-and-see approach, the movement continued in Prague and Vienna. Prague, a significant spiritual center, saw its rabbinical court divided, but many still believed in the movement. The enthusiasm led to Jews writing letters to Bohemian communities, vaguely hinting at the faith of Sabbatai. In Moravia and Hungary, Sabbatianism gained strongholds, especially with Ashkenazi Jews.
On February 22nd, 1666, the ruler, Markgraf of Ansbach, issued a printed proclamation, assuring the Jews of his protection and commanding all officials to assist them in the collection of their debts and protect them. At the same time, strictly forbidden to transfer their property or themselves to leave the country without special permission.
The most detailed information on the Sabbatian movement comes from Hamburg, due to Rabbi Jacob Sasportas, whose name we have said many times. He was the #1 opponent to the movement, and at times the only one. He is said to be the 11th generation of the medieval Jewish scholar, Nachmanides. He documented his struggle against the movement in his work Sisath Nobel Ṣevi, The Fading Flower of Ṣevi, which is a key source of Sabbatian history. As a master of the art of Melissa, characterized by artificial and elusive use of biblical and Talmudic phrases, he was originally an active and powerful Kabbalist in Morocco, closer to Cordovero's speculative Kabbalah. He had a difficult character and faced bad luck throughout his rabbinic career, being kicked out of Morocco, moving to England and leaving during the plague, went to Amsterdam and later Hamburg, where he entered the rising Sabbatian movement. He never reached the same authority as he did in Morocco, which had a bitter impact on him, growing increasingly bitter and harsh. Even colleagues, when writing to him were cautious, for the slightest hint of criticism may put him into a flying rage. Outside his personal tendencies historically, his merits are beyond dispute, and the modern historian can appreciate his honesty and reliability as a witness, though his edited writings exaggerated his opposition to the movement. Originally, he sought to authenticate Nathan's prophetic claims and acknowledge the power of Nathan's letters from the East, even giving a sermon that left his listeners divided about his stance on the Messiah.
I never claimed it, that is, the prophecy regarding Sabbatai Ṣevi, to be impossible as such, for it is indeed possible that the Rabbi Sabbatai Ṣevi will be our king and savior. If the prophecy is properly authenticated, I shall accept as true whatever a duly confirmed prophet says.
And Sasportus's initial openness toward Sabbatianism quickly turned to hatred as he felt betrayed and tricked. He revised and falsified his past works to present himself as the foremost opponent of the movement, fabricating a narrative that he had always seen through its deceptions. His letters provide valuable insights into the Sephardic community in Hamburg, where news of the Messianic events from Egypt first arrived in November 1665. Many Portuguese Jews, former Marranos, and wealthy merchants were cautious at first, but became increasingly drawn to the movement. By February 1666, excitement had peaked in Hamburg as word of Sabbatai's actions spread.
The letters from Smyrna were read from the pulpit in the synagogue. Addressed to members of the Sephardi congregation, the Ashkenazim used to come to the Portuguese synagogue in order to hear the good news. The younger people donned their best clothes. In addition, broad sashes of green silk, the color of Sabbatai Ṣevi. The believers danced with such enthusiasm that everything was thrown into confusion. 12 dancers, chosen by lot, were to perform, but this call to order went unheeded in the general enthusiasm and rejoicing. 8 elders were practicing a special dance to express our joy at the tidings. Demonstrations of joy were accompanied by penances and mortifications, fasted every day from daybreak to sunset, and underwent severe mortifications.
When news of Ṣevi's arrest reached Europe, the believers' enthusiasm only grew.
He freely chose imprisonment in order to lighten the messianic woes by vicarious suffering.
Sasportus voiced his concerns to European rabbis and criticized the leaders, fearing for the future of Judaism. Sasportus recognized the seeds of heresy and schism long before others. Brotherhoods dedicated to prayer, penitence, and charity were established in Hamburg, mainly by wealthy merchants. The Ashkenazi community in Hamburg was particularly influenced, remaining committed to the movement even after. It starts with the meeting and the man, Rabbi Nehemiah Cohen. The role of our Nehemiah Cohen in Sabbatai Ṣevi's history is clouded with conflicting accounts and legends. Initially, it was thought that Nathan of Gaza would visit him, but Nehemiah instead sought out Sabbatai himself. Whether he acted on his own or at the request of Polish believers remains unclear. Labe described him as a great Kabbalist, while Sasportus claimed he was regarded as a fool in Poland. Numerous versions of the event only add to the confusion. Skolem, however, emphasizes the significance of Nehemiah's role in this moment.
Events took a dramatic turn that still baffles the historian. The Messiah was visited not by Nathan of Gaza, but by another prophet, Nehemiah, who proved to be the beginning of his undoing. Cohen remains an obscure chapter in the history of Sabbatai Ṣevi. The sudden appearance of the man and the unexpected denouement which it precipitated appealed. Novelists and historical writers made grateful use of Nehemiah as a deus ex machina. The historian, however, who tries to investigate the details of this strange incident, is faced with insoluble riddles.
Nehemiah was known for his strict literal interpretation of religious texts, making him automatically dismissive of Ṣevi's messianic claims.
As an old man, He told his story in 1690, shortly before his death, to Leib B. Ozer. It was said that he proclaimed himself as the future Messiah of the House of Joseph during his wanderings in Poland and Germany after 1666. Nehemiah was a messianic pretender without imaginative originality. His imagination enabled him to envisage himself as the future martyr Messiah of the tribe of Joseph, and to apply to himself all the associated traditional expectations in their most rigidly literal form. But he was incapable of an original and personal recreation or recasting of the apocalyptic traditions. The problem of the Messiah of the House of Joseph became a permanent and often burning issue in the Sabbatian movement. The acrimonious debate continued for 3 days and nights, during which they scarcely ate and drank and had very little sleep. He, Nehemiah, would not admit any of Sabbatai's proofs and arguments. The rabbis present were at a loss, but inclined towards Sabbatai. According to Nehemiah, the altercation culminated in a furious outburst. Nehemiah accused Sabbatai of plunging Israel into deadly peril by his lies, even called him an enticer and renegade who deserved the death penalty. Nehemiah suddenly ran away, shouting to the Turkish guards that he wanted to become a Muslim. Nehemiah was immediately taken to Adrianople, where he denounced Sabbatai for fomenting sedition. Soon afterward, he returned to Poland and greatly repented.
Upon returning to Lvov, Nehemiah maintained strict observance of the law, telling people,
"Wait for the true Messiah, but not for this one."
Afterward, he appears to have changed his name and moved around, concealing his identity to avoid recognition. Without concrete documentation, it's uncertain if Nehemiah's testimony to the authorities in Adrianople directly led to subsequent events. However, complaints from a sheikh and others accuse Sabbatai Ṣevi of immorality and lewdness. Nehemiah and other rabbis testified that Sabbatai was a lewd person, though these accusations were likely fueled by rumors after his apostasy. His wife was tied to the accusations of debauchery and ideas of sexual liberation due to her past.
Was found to have relations with women, and accusations of lewdness and debauches with women and with favorites. Sabbatai was attended by 70 beautiful virgins, the daughters of the most illustrious rabbis, all dressed in royal apparel. Sarah was like unto a queen. 3 virgins were delivered into his hands. He kept them for several days and then returned them, without having touched them. Rumors of libertinism increased considerably after the apostasy, and abominations which Sabbatai perpetrated at that time were projected back on the earlier period before his apostasy. The same source mentions instances of antinomianism, such as treading tefillin underfoot or tearing up a Torah scroll and trampling upon it. This behavior agrees well with the mood exhibited by Sabbatai's benediction that has permitted that which is forbidden.
Following Rabbi Nehemiah Cohen's conversion in early September, Sabbatai was taken under escort to the Sultan. The ambassador of the Habsburg Empire reported that Muslim authorities decided against executing Sabbatai to avoid sparking a new religious movement. When Sabbatai was brought before the Privy Council, he faced high-ranking officials, including the Sultan's chief preacher, who sought his conversion to Islam.
From eyewitnesses that Sabbatai, as he was led to the Sultan's court, accompanied by many rabbis, and the Jews prayed for him. On the way, he told them, "Behold what I have done. I am going to the king, girt with a green and miserable belt, and I am much distressed about this." When they heard him thus, they were afraid. First, he said that he was about to take the crown from the Sultan's head, and now he is afraid of appearing before him in a green belt.
Accounts of Sabbatai's trial vary, but Turkish sources suggest he denied inciting the Jewish community. His passive stance likely spared him, as he had never advocated rebellion being the Messiah with no army. The Sultan accepted his conversion, granting him the title of Kapichi Bashi, palace gatekeeper, and a royal pension. Sabbatai's wife also converted under the protection of the Sultan's mother. Though offered to marry one of the queen's maids, he likely declined. Both Jewish and Christian sources agree he denounced his followers during the apostasy process.
When Sabbatai took that is, the Muslim robe, he did so without illumination, and he had no spiritual knowledge of what he was doing, to the effect that the Messiah was bereft of light, that is, in a depressive phase when he apostatized. The available evidence, however, does not permit definite conclusions on the subject, nor does it yield any suggestions as to when Sabbatai began to seek mystical explanations and justifications of his action.
Sabbatai's apostasy, rather than immediately collapsing the movement, left a lasting impact on the diaspora. While some returned to traditional beliefs, many continued to see his influence as profound, even without fully knowing his personality. His message spread beyond its original intentions, and despite his conversion, many believed a new era had begun. The event shattered the simplicity of Messianic faith, forcing believers to embrace a paradoxical hope, where faith without outward signs led to contradictions and a belief system rooted in destructive paradoxes.
The Sabbatian paradox was not that of a saint who suffers and whose suffering is a mystery hidden with God, but of a saint who sins.
Nathan's shift from halakhic texts to mystical writings like the Zohar subtly undermined rabbinic authority, laying the groundwork for its decline. While Sabbatai Ṣevi's personal influence was limited, his apostasy marked a turning point. Following Ṣevi's conversion to Islam, disbelief spread amongst his followers, many of whom had expected him to die a martyr. While some refused to accept the news and continued to believe in him, particularly in Turkey and Hamburg, others began to realize they had been deceived.
Violent emotions of high hopes crushed and of burning shame agitated the Jewish communities everywhere. He brought ignominy upon the whole of Jewry by denying his faith and apostatizing, which nobody would ever have expected of him. That a holy man, scholar, and Kabbalist like him should suddenly become a renegade from the God of Israel.
Two groups emerged among the anti-Sabbatian rabbis: those who launched aggressive attacks on the believers, and those who chose silence, hoping to quietly restore normalcy. The rabbis in Constantinople faced the challenge of maintaining order, but Sabbatai's status as the Sultan's protégé made open opposition impossible. Despite this, believers continued to defend their faith, and tensions between them and non-believers persisted, particularly in Constantinople. Gratitude rituals, special devotions, and new practices vanished as the traditional religious order regained control. Secret gatherings emerged, but no formal excommunications occurred early on. The rabbis concentrated on restoring traditional law, hoping the Sabbatian faith would fade. While it persisted in some circles, the public rituals and behaviors eventually disappeared. Letters from Turkey reveal the growing turmoil as believers were forbidden to organize, hold services, or publicly practice their faith.
Throughout Turkey, no believer dared to admit publicly that he was a believer, but silence alone would enable the disturbed community to find the way back to normal life. We have a tradition not to speak either good or evil of the affair of Sabbatai Ṣevi, neither curse it nor bless it. In the course of time, interpreted in a more positive fashion as an exculpation or at least extenuation of Sabbatai Ṣevi. No Jew, young or old, man or woman, utter the name of this man or speak to them.
In Egypt, believers were formally excommunicated. But when news of Sabbatai's apostasy reached Europe, many refused to accept it, hoping Messianic events would continue. By December 1666, in Amsterdam, the truth was undeniable, though some still believe Sabbatai's apostasy had saved Israel. Small groups of Sephardic Jews in Amsterdam and Ashkenazi communities in Holland and northern Germany remained convinced of his messiahship, fueled by Nathan's letters. In Italy by late October, Rabbi Joseph H. Levi expected the movement to die out, but many clung to their faith. In Venice, rabbis ordered the destruction of all related documents. The Italian Jewish community suffered material loss, exposure to apostasy, and increased Christian hostility.
All the congregations in the Holy Land, Turkey, Germany, Holland, Poland, and Russia admitted that the opponents of the movement had been right. They burned all the records and writings in which his name was mentioned. Not be remembered, repented, and confessed. Woe unto us, for we have sinned. Also, the rabbis of Constantinople sent orders to the communities near and far to do away with everything that had been written, forgotten, and mentioned no more.
The large-scale suppression of the movement was so effective that today few know about it, even among Jews, who rarely speak of it despite being profoundly affected. Some surviving documents were so unrecognized that bibliographers later mistook them for ordinary Kabbalistic manuals of midnight devotions. While Sabbatai remained in Adrianople, rumors of his continued messianic role persisted, with Nathan of Gaza stepping in to redirect the movement. Nathan crafted a narrative around Sabbatai's apostasy, treating it as a necessary part of the messianic plan. He sent letters of encouragement, maintaining faith among followers who continued secret gatherings despite being banned from public displays. The movement divided into two groups: enthusiastic believers, including some Kabbalistic rabbis, and cautious supporters. Despite pressure from rabbis to silence him, Nathan persisted, developing mystical doctrines to sustain the movement. Early Sabbatianism, while showing antinomian tendencies, remained rooted in pious Orthodox Judaism, differing mainly in their belief that redemption had already begun or was imminent. Nathan, under Sabbatai's instruction, traveled to Rome for a Kabbalistic mission. During his journey, he adapted his messages depending on his audience, speaking differently to believers and skeptics. He maintained his opposition to the ruling class, while continuing to reinterpret mystical texts, keeping the movement alive. Despite increasing challenges, Nathan's influence persisted, and the Sabbatian movement, though weakened, continued to endure.
The Kabbalistic ritual of Tikkun, which Nathan was to perform in Rome, he undoubtedly considered it as in some way analogous to the Messiah's descent into the realm of the Kalippa. The Messiah's ministry was exercised in the sphere of Ishmael. A similar ministry would have to be exercised by the Messiah's apostle in the realm of Edom, that is, Rome. What Nathan, or his master, had in mind was probably a magico-Kabbalistic act destined to bring about the ruin of Rome. He certainly did not think of apostatizing.
Nathan eventually fled to Castoria, Greece, where he found many faithful believers among commoners and merchants. Known as the Holy Lamp, he offered shelter and guidance to his followers. In 1670, he completed his chief work, Sefer HaBeriah, the Book of Creation, which became the foundational text of the Sabbatian Kabbalah for the next generation, influencing especially its heretical forms. Nathan died in 1680, and though his death was a loss for his followers, his burial site became a pilgrimage destination until its destruction during World War II, but reproduced by Rozans. Many believers still felt like they were on the brink of a new era. While outward events suggested failure, inward faith persisted. Followers viewed his apostasy as a mystery, even a positive event, allowing them to reconcile the contradiction between external reality and inner belief. They devalued the visible world, focusing instead on an inner, spiritual life, which led to a reinterpretation of traditional Jewish values. Believers criticized those who interpreted the Torah according to the flesh, and began seeing themselves as the true spiritual Jews. Sabbatians viewed their movement as a form of realized eschatology, where redemption unfolded despite outward appearances. Nathan's teachings shaped this evolving doctrine, helping rationalize Sabbatai's failure to fulfill traditional messianic roles. Faith in the Messiah, unaccompanied by works or miracles, was a break from tradition, where faith required signs. This paradox of a Messiah who apostatized became central to their belief, leading to further reinterpretations of tradition through allegories of exile and humiliation.
Scripture has 70 different meanings.
Corresponding to the Torah, that is likened to wine, just as the numerical value of wine, Yayin is 70, thus there are 70 aspects to the Torah.
The Messiah's ministry were not explicitly revealed in the Talmud, lest people misunderstood them, and in the book Zohar, they are stated in a hidden fashion. It is also said there that several books of Haggadah revealing these things would be found at the time of the Messiah's advent. For the mind cannot accept this, since his behavior appears to go against traditional religion.
David wished to worship idols. A transgression performed with good intention is better than a precept performed with evil intention. The kingdom, namely the Roman Empire, will be converted to heresy.
Nathan drew from the Lurianic Kabbalah to intensify Sabbatianism's antinomian tendencies. Followers believed that even acts considered sinful could serve a hidden redemptive purpose. Nathan's letters promoted this antinomianism, allowing for a radical rethinking of Jewish law and tradition. In this view, Sabbatai's apostasy wasn't a failure, but a necessary step in the cosmic battle between good and evil. Reinterpreting Jewish texts, they believed that the Messiah's descent into evil, symbolized by his apostasy, was essential for the world's redemption. They drew on Kabbalistic ideas like extracting holy sparks from evil or tikkun, seeing Sabbatai's engagement with the Kilipa, realm of evil, as part of this process. Traditional Jewish eschatology seeks not just the defeat of Gentiles, but their total annihilation, and Sabbatians saw Sabbatai's role as key to this cosmic victory. A key aspect of Sabbatian thought was the re-examination of sexual morality. Drawing on Kabbalistic interpretations, some Sabbatians argued that even the biblical laws of incest were only valid in the lower world and had no place in the higher spiritual realms. This antinomian thinking represented a dramatic shift in Jewish moral law, as followers believed that the Messiah's coming had ushered in a new age where traditional laws no longer held the same authority, a new spiritual era. Nathan's letters had the same effect on the religion like Paul's letters did for Christianity. His letters introduced the idea of a new age, or Shemitah, where cosmic cycles dictated shifts in the interpretation of the Torah. Followers believed that with Sabbatai's arrival, a new era of mercy had begun, requiring a fresh understanding of Jewish law and practice. This new age reshaped traditional beliefs, marking a radical departure from past interpretations. In his final years, Sabbatai maintained a dual life outwardly.
Behaved like a rabbi, as was his wont. Sometimes he prayed and behaved like a Jew, and sometimes like a Muslim, and he did queer things.
His influence persisted in small circles, and he even developed new rituals and prayers for his followers. Despite attempts by Jewish opponents to discredit him, Sabbatai's reputation remained strong among his most devoted believers. He continued to reinterpret his actions through a mystical lens, claiming that everything he did, including his apostasy, was divinely ordained.
And do not believe, my brethren, that I did this, becoming a Muslim, on the strength of an illumination, so that you become terrified and say, today or tomorrow, the illumination will depart from him, and he will regret what he had said and will be very sorry for it. This is not so, but I did this on my own, through the great power and strength of the truth and faith, which no wind in the world and no sages and prophets can cause me to leave my place.
On March 6, 1671, Sabbatai divorced his wife Sarah, citing religious reasons. Sabbatai's followers attributed mystical significance to the event, viewing it as part of his Messianic mission. Sabbatai soon remarried, but his new wife died before the marriage could be consummated. His erratic behavior, alternating between religious ecstasies and deep depressions, puzzled those around him and reinforced his belief that his actions were divinely guided. In 1667, a son, Ishmael Mordecai, was born, fulfilling Nathan's prophecy. Sabbatai's influence continued, attracting followers from all walks of life. Despite ongoing controversy, Sabbatai maintained a following, often engaging in ritualistic behaviors and mystical rites that confused both Jews and Muslims. His visits to Constantinople included strange processions and Jewish prayers, defying Islamic norms, which led to his arrest and eventual banishment to Albania. These actions baffled authorities and cemented his reputation as a polarizing figure.
Wearing phylacteries and a Jewish bonnet instead of a turban, surrounded by women, wine, and several leaders of his sect.
During his exile in Albania, Sabbatai's behavior became increasingly erratic, culminating in scandals such as an accusation of impregnating a follower's betrothed. These incidents alienated many of his remaining followers, though he still maintained contact with a loyal inner circle who continued to view him as a messianic figure. His teachings on the mystical mystery of the Godhead were shared within this circle, sparking further theological debates. One follower documented Sabbatai's expanded explanation of the mystery of the Godhead in the text, Raza di Mehemnutha, the mystery of the faith, which later caused controversy. Rebranded as Faith of All by Nehemiah Hayyan, the doctrine, filled with contradictions, described the highest levels of the divine, Ein Sof, as a distant, non-intervening entity, sparking confusion and debate. Some even compared it to Epicurean views of detached gods, a concept Sabbatai kept secret among his closest disciples.
There is in the first cause an infinitely simple will, which had from all times been contained in its root, that is, in the root of the first cause, and which is primeval like it. When this will willed that existence should come into being, it emanated from the Lord, or the owner, of the will like light from its source. As soon as it proceeded from the first cause, there also proceeded from the simple will the Shekinah, which is of the nature of stern judgment. But the simple will is supernal mercy, and the Lord of the will, that is, the first cause, is the root of mercy, which is the will. The will is the root of judgment, that is, the Shekinah, which is an effect of the simple will. The Shekinah is signified by the final H of the Tetragrammaton, YHWH, and when she descends into the emanation, Asiluth, she clothes herself in the Sephira, Malkuth. The simple will, which is the Holy One, blessed be He, the Holy King, is signified by the first three letters, YHW, of the Tetragrammaton, and it is clothed in the Sephira, Tifereth. It has the character of the male in relation to the Shekinah, which receives from it, whereas the Shekinah is like the female in relation to the Holy One. Blessed be He who grants her his influx, like a man to his wife.
In the final years of his life, Sabbatai experienced another illumination in 1676, leading him to march through the city, singing hymns and proclaiming redemption. His alarming behavior caught the attention of the Turks, and a few months later, on the Day of Atonement, he died in Dulcinea, Montenegro, nearly 10 years after his apostasy. His final letter revealed his continued dual identity as both a Jew and a Muslim, though news of his death spread slowly, taking months to reach some regions. The myth of his messianic role persisted. His isolated burial near the water only fueled the legend surrounding his death. Nathan of Gaza, after a period of silence, helped further this myth. And by 1678 to 1679, rumors of Sabbatai's occultation began to circulate.
The Sabbatian doctrine of occultation was formulated by Nathan, to whom his celestial messengers, or Magidim, Joshua and Caleb, revealed in a state of illumination that a mirror was exalted and hidden, body and soul, on the Day of Atonement. Whoever thinks that he died like all men and his spirit returned to God commits a grave sin. The liturgical practice of the believers in those years is illuminating in this respect. Every morning and every evening we say, "He and no other, He is our God," probably recited together with the traditional one, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," established either by Sabbatai Ṣevi or Nathan, subsequently passed into the prayer book of the Don Me.
Sabbatai Ṣevi's legacy is shrouded in myths and conflicting narratives, ranging from messianic greatness to utter disgrace. For some, he represented a missed opportunity for Jewish redemption, while for others, he became a cautionary tale of division within Judaism. His life, deeply tied to Kabbalistic mysticism, left a lasting imprint on Jewish thought, sparking debates that continued for centuries. Sabbatai's movement laid the foundation for later mystical sects, particularly influencing Jacob Frank in the 18th century. Frank would take Sabbatianism into more radical territory, blending Jewish and Christian elements in ways that shocked the Jewish world. In our next video, we'll explore how Jacob Frank's transformation of this controversial movement not only redefined its followers, but also influenced modern ideologies that still shape the world today. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.